Is DEI, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion, actually creating the exact problems we're trying to solve? Well, a recent study is saying so. I'm curious, do y'all like diversity, equity, and inclusion? Do you think it's getting rid of racism and discrimination? Let me know in the comments whether you think it's doing that or doing the opposite. But look, in other news, the U.S. government is aiming to launch new programs that could track whether other countries have programs to alter the weather. Yes, the U.S. government is going to start monitoring things, including solar geoengineering, and making sure other countries aren't stealthily doing it. Also, could China's green monopoly be coming to an end? Well, President Donald Trump has said that he wants to pull the United States out of programs like the Paris Climate Accord, and he also plans to revive American energy production. And this could have a big impact on the so-called green tech and green energy, a lot of which comes from China. Now, I'll be talking about these topics and more today, but before we dive into it, I released a special report on how the Chinese Communist Party is using disinformation and lawfare to target people right here in the United States. That's right, this is happening right here on U.S. soil. The special report called CCP Targets Americans Using Disinformation and Lawfare is out now, and you can find it on Epoch TV, YouTube, and Geoengineering World. I'll also put a link in the description of this episode, and so again, go watch it. This is a really important topic. Please check it out. That said, folks, first off, a recent study found that programs for DEI, that's again diversity, equity, and inclusion, may actually create the very problems they claim to address. The study was conducted by the Network Contagion Research Institute in Rutgers University, and it found that DEI trainings, the ones you might have to go through for your work or your school, or maybe you want to do it, they actually resulted in people seeing discrimination and abuse in areas where no such things existed. They started basically imagining it. It also found that people who undergo these trainings, they become more hostile and they become more authoritarian, ironically becoming kind of what they claim to oppose. Now, let me show you this. This is from the actual report. It says DEI programs purport to cultivate inclusive environments for people from diverse backgrounds and encourage greater empathy in interpersonal interactions. It says a key component of DEI offerings lies in diversity pedagogy, lectures, trainings, and educational resources ostensibly designed to educate participants about their prejudice and bias in order to eliminate discrimination. And notes that as institutions across corporate and educational sectors increasingly embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into their foundational strategies, which is kind of changing now, by the way, they say it is crucial to evaluate the effectiveness of common aspects of this pedagogy, meaning, well, if they're going to be doing it everywhere, we should see what the actual effects are, right? So they did that, and they said this. They said, taken together, the limited evidence suggests that some DEI programs not only fail to achieve their goal, but can actively undermine diversity efforts. They do the opposite. It says, specifically, mandatory trainings that focus on particular target groups, meaning maybe it's about supporting one racial group or one gender today or one identity today. They say that doing that actually has the effect of fostering discomfort and perceptions of unfairness. The very trainings themselves cause the exact same thing they're claiming to oppose. It notes as well that DEI initiatives seen as affirmative action rather than business strategy can provoke backlash, increasing rather than reducing racial resentment. It makes people more racially resentful. And diversity initiatives, it says, aimed at managing bias can fail, sometimes resulting in decreased representation and triggering negativity among employees. In other words, it says some DEI programs appear to backfire. Now, on that point, when they say some and when they say it's limited, the basic nature of this research they did was they were not able to get access to some of the training materials because they're copyrighted or behind different protections and things like that. And so the limits on the study were not because they're saying it was a limited finding. It was because they were given limited access by the organizations that do these type of trainings. Now, personally, I'd say that DEI programs are not backfiring. I would actually say these trainings they're doing at schools and businesses and everywhere else, I would say they're actually doing exactly what they're meant to do. They're rooted in communist critical theory, in particular critical race theory and critical gender theory. The entire idea of critical theory was to reinterpret communist class struggle and rewrite this into different areas of like new struggle in the areas of race, gender, and other things instead of communist class struggle. Because remember, the old communist ideas with Marx and Engels and so on, it was about the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, the rich and the poor, the upper class and the lower class. Communists found they couldn't export that to the United States because America, we have more fluid class structures. You can move between classes in this country. And so class warfare doesn't resonate as much with Americans. So they had to look at what separates Americans. And they found, well, religions, we have diversity. Ironically, we're a very diverse country. Various religions, various racial groups, various cultures. Now they've created other things like various identities. And so they capitalized on these things and created artificial divisions between the different groups in this country in order to expand the communist ideology. Meaning the very purpose of these is to create animosity. The exact purpose of this is to make people begin to see other groups as their enemies, because that's what communism does by design. That was the whole nature of class struggle. Now, of course, I'd imagine many people pushing the DEI agenda, I would imagine a lot of them don't see it that way. I think a lot of them actually believe they're fighting against things like racism and so on, right? I've met some of them genuinely believe it. But the new studies are important though. They show that DEI does not achieve what they hope it will achieve. DEI creates hatred. It creates hatred. And back to that study, let me show you this. One of the big things it found was that DEI trainings cause people to start perceiving the problems that they were taught existed, even when the problem does not actually exist. And not only that, but some of the DEI trainings even cause people to become more suspicious of others, to become more authoritarian. They become kind of like fascists, you could say, and to even begin looking for more extreme ways to target the people and punish the people who they artificially believe are guilty of violating the DEI policies. Let me show you exactly what the study found. This is back to it, the exact quote. It says, the evidence presented in these studies reveals that while purporting to combat bias, some anti-oppressive DEI narratives can engender a hostile attribution bias and heighten racial suspicion, prejudicial attitudes, authoritarian policing, and support for punitive behaviors in the absence of evidence, mob rule, and punishment for a transgression deserving punishment, that they believe at least. And note that although addressed in the studies reported herein, it is also possible that these factors are mutually reinforcing and spread through social contagion. It manufactures a type of contagion within society where people become more hateful. I'll give you a few examples. It has a list here. One of them, it says, the anti-oppressive intervention, one of the DEI trainings. It says, this DEI training rooted in anti-oppressive rhetoric introduces narratives that lead people to assume that certain groups are inherent oppressors and others are inherent victims. Two, another one, it says, on increased racial suspicion. It says, exposure leads to hostile attribution bias. They may look at a person, judge them by their race, and automatically assume guilt because they become racist, ironically, through anti-racist training. And it says it causes participants to see discrimination when there is no evidence that discrimination has occurred, driving racial prejudice, intergroup hostility, suspicion, and division. Another one is authoritarian policing. It says this heightened suspicion triggers authoritarian policing tendencies. Excuse me. It says a heightened suspicion triggers authoritarian policing tendencies, leading people to endorse surveillance and purity testing. Do you align with me enough for me to like you or hate you, right? It says strict social controls and escalating responses and corrective coercion. It kind of turns them into fascists, ironically. Number 4, punitive retribution. It says participants show greater support for extreme punitive measures against perceived oppressors, as well as those seen as ideologically impure. And number 5, it says calls for more intervention. The heightened punitive atmosphere feeds back into demands for more anti-oppressive DEI training, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of suspicion and intolerance. And look, basically what it found is, ironically, the DEI trainings create the exact problem that they allege to fix. DEI trainings turn people into like ideological police who recognize problems where no problems exist, who judge people, ironically, not based on their character, but by their race or their gender, and automatically assume things about those people based on race and gender, what we would traditionally call discrimination. And then, in addition to that, begin demanding authoritarian backlash on the people they have begun discriminating against. It turns them into authoritarian racists and bigots, ironically. And this is important too, because remember, these trainings are being done throughout just about every branch of government now. Funding is being given to radical organizations doing these trainings in your schools, in your workplaces, even in the private sector. Some states make it mandatory. In New York City, for example, where I work, this is mandatory. And so the question is, are they actually solving the issues they claim to solve, or are they making it worse? And according to this study now, they're actually causing the very thing they claim to be opposing. Now, folks, in other news, something interesting right now. Among the policies of the incoming Trump administration is, a lot of things around transgender policies, they call them. And doctors right now are facing possible lawsuits. Remember, when Trump was on the campaign trail, he was saying that he will open avenues for people who underwent these surgeries to sue the doctors and anybody else who may have been involved in the process of them making the decision. A case along these lines was actually recently filed against several California healthcare providers, and this case could also be relevant to another one currently being considered in the U.S. Supreme Court. Wall Street Journal said this. It said, as the Supreme Court ponders whether Tennessee may ban transgender treatment for adolescents, and again, this is going to the Supreme Court, meaning this will determine for the whole country, it's worth reading a medical negligence lawsuit that was filed in California just recently. It says a day after the justice's oral arguments. It notes that Clementine Breen, a now 20-year-old UCLA student, alleges she was fast-tracked to puberty blockers at age 12, male hormones at age 13, and a double mastectomy at 14. And notes that at first consultation, the complaint says the doctor immediately and unquestionably affirmed Clementine as transgender, recommending surgical implantation of puberty blockers. And notes that as Miss Breen alleges, misinterpretations were used to convince her parents to agree, including statements that puberty blockers are completely reversible, which is not the case, by the way, and that Clementine would commit suicide if she did not begin taking testosterone. That's what her parents were told. Now, notes, Miss Breen is suing her physician and their institutions in state court. And notes the hospital declined to comment on the case or her allegations, citing patient privacy. But it states that further in, other states might take a different approach. But given how fast gender ideology has taken hold in an environment of political and medical conformity, Miss Breen's lawsuit might not be the last. And I'd agree, it'll probably be far from the last. There will likely be many, many grounds for different lawsuits like this. And part of this may include lawsuits over the drugs that they're prescribing to children, like puberty blockers, and some of the impacts they have on health. Remember, right now as we speak, just recently, the UK, the United Kingdom, they have banned puberty blockers for kids under the age of 18 because they've found that they are harmful to children. They've found that they're harmful. And remember, those studies now could impact the policies here in the United States. Another area, very likely, will be on how kids have been convinced that they're transgender and whether they were groomed into the process, whether medical professionals tried to convince them that something was there that they may not have thought initially. And there will likely be other areas for potential lawsuits, including what the children have been told about the effects of the procedure and whether or not the procedures are reversible, because in many cases, kids seem to believe that if they do this, they can turn back. A lot of young women, unfortunately, who get double mastectomies believe that it can be reversed when it cannot, at least not through natural means. And even with puberty blockers, they do in fact cause long-term damage because it messes up the entire process of puberty. Now, again, we will be seeing in New York and elsewhere whether this applies, but there are lawsuits going through right now, and most importantly, the Supreme Court is going to be making a decision on it. Now, folks, in other news, Texas is suing a doctor in New York for prescribing an abortion drug to someone in the state. Epoch Times said this. It said that Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton filed a lawsuit on Friday against a New York physician and founder of a pro-abortion coalition, saying that she had prescribed abortion drugs via telemedicine to a Texas resident, an out-of-state doctor, again, providing medicine to somebody in a state where this would be illegal. It says her actions violated Texas law because she was not licensed to practice medicine in the state. Now, further, it states that Texas law prohibits out-of-state physicians from practicing medicine in the state of Texas, which includes out-of-state practice through telemedicine, Paxton noted in the complaint. And in addition, it says in Texas, a physician is prohibited from sending any abortion-inducing drugs by mail. It is not allowed in the state of Texas. Now, it also states, according to Texas law, abortions are banned after a heartbeat can be detected. They have the heartbeat bill, right? Which is normally around 6 weeks gestation, unless there is a medical emergency. They say there is no exception for pregnancy resulting from rape or incest. Meaning when people say, well, what about rape? What about incest? What if the woman's life is in danger? They allow abortion in those cases. But if there's no reason outside of that, then no. If the baby has a heartbeat, they do not allow the baby to be killed. Now, this is important, folks, because with the overturn of Roe v. Wade, right, at the Supreme Court level, basically what that did is it took abortion from being a federal issue and it turned it into a state issue. Every state now has its own laws on abortion, and some states like Texas have put pretty strict laws in place to prevent abortion for the most part, with, again, a few exceptions. Some people are still looking for ways around this, such as traveling out of state for abortions to states that allow, sometimes even like almost full-term abortions, or by getting abortion drugs prescribed from out of state, telemedicine. Now, if this case is upheld in Texas, it can make it more difficult for people in Texas or in states with very tough laws on abortion to, again, get out-of-state abortions. This could determine part of that. Now, like in other news, the U.S. government is aiming at launching new programs that could track whether other countries have programs to change the weather. And this includes monitoring for things like solar geoengineering, which we talked about before. I'll be talking about this more after we come back from a quick break. We'll be back in less than 60 seconds, so don't go anywhere.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Back. The U.S. government is aiming at We back on? All right, folks, sorry about that. Being on the road, we have some issues sometimes. I'm actually traveling right now in Arizona, in fact, at Turning Point USA. And so back to it. Now, look, the U.S. government is aiming to launch new programs right now as we speak to track whether other countries have things in place to alter the weather. And this includes monitoring for programs like solar geoengineering, which if you've watched Crossroads for a while, you know that we've talked quite a lot about this. You might remember we talked about some of the proposals in place on this. And with solar geoengineering, what this does is it's made to reduce the amount of sunlight that reaches the Earth. There are many different proposals in place for this. Some of them include injecting aerosols into the stratosphere, which would, again, block some of the sunlight that would normally reach the planet. You had other programs through organizations like, some of these internationalist groups that want to put like giant plastic film in space to prevent sunlight from reaching the Earth. And there are actually a lot of other things like this. Now, with these programs that aim for this, there's some important stuff with this, right? Give me one sec, folks. All right, let me show you this. This is futurism. It says experiments to alter the climate are starting to take place all over the world to the degree that the United States is now building a system to detect when and where it's happening. It says further in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, that's NOAA, and the Department of Energy are now aiming to start tracking solar geoengineering endeavors. And it says many scientists are worried that these efforts, while well-intended, right, trying to prevent global warming, they say they could do more harm than good by causing destructive weather patterns or benefiting some countries more than others. And such, right, as such, the NOAA is working to strengthen its surveillance and recognition of these projects and institutions, and individual groups are increasingly undertaking pilot tests of geoengineering concepts. Sorry about that, folks. We're having some technical issues. Back to this paper, though, right? They're trying right now, the US government is looking to begin monitoring whether other countries are trying to mess with the weather. And there are a lot of different concerns they have with this. Part of it might be that there could be unintended consequences, that they're experimenting with maybe preventing sunlight from reaching the Earth, and they do too much or too little of it, and they might cause, detrimental harm to a certain country. It might also be used as a type of weapon, intentionally or not, where a certain country may be harmed by this and another won't. They note that as a result, the agency's chemical sciences laboratory has begun deploying large balloon sentries with equipment to detect aerosol levels in the clouds. Sent miles above the planet's surface, these balloons report back to the locations and amounts of any unusual aerosol concentrations in the stratosphere, so the NOAA can begin to track where geoengineering is taking place. Now, this is interesting because what this basically means, the government now is putting balloons in the air to monitor if people Sorry about that, folks. We're having some technical issues. One of the problems of traveling with the show, unfortunately. But look, back to the issue of solar geoengineering. I've talked about a lot of this before on the show. Those of you who watch Crossroads for a while might remember we've discussed some of the different plans that are going around with this. What's interesting right now is that what the government is doing is they seem to recognize that individual groups trying to run tests on these programs, if they mess up with it, if they overdo something, or if they experiment with something, they can actually cause long-term damage. One of the concerns with, for example, cloud seeding is along these lines where you induce rain. Another concern, for example, would be spraying aerosols into the stratosphere to induce like multi-year periods where less sunlight hits the surface of the earth. And if you can have private organizations funding, running, carrying these programs out, well, that presents a type of public health crisis or threat that can affect us, and so they're beginning to monitor to make sure it's not happening. This is important as well because there are a lot of countries that do this already. Programs like this are actually fairly common in some countries. Saudi Arabia just is one example of this. Saudi Arabia recently announced that not only does it do this has been known for a while, but it's actually expanding its cloud seeding programs to induce rain. But cloud seeding is a bit different from solar geoengineering, right? And there are concerns with experimental technologies they're trying to work on that could reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the earth. Notably, it's not clear exactly what effect this would have on plant life. It's not clear what effect this would have on human life. One of the discussions that was very popular going around was that some of the climate activist folks out there, kind of trying to get this passed. They were suggesting that they could create kind of an artificial volcanic effect where, again, a volcano releases a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. It prevents sunlight from reaching the earth, and they say it'll cool the earth. But if we look at periods in history where that has happened, the very scenarios that they cite, we know that we saw famine, we saw crop death, we saw very hard times for humanity. And if individuals are trying to artificially create such a scenario, while that is something the government should be concerned about, and now it's important because they are putting things in place to make sure individual groups or foreign countries cannot do that. Now, in other news, folks, the big focus on so-called green energy and green tech, it could soon be coming to an end. President-elect Donald Trump has said that he wants to pull the United States out of programs like the Paris Climate Accord, for example. And he also plans to revive American energy production. And while this can have a big impact on countries where the economies rely very heavily on energy and gas exports to the United States, but another key industry this is going to affect is that of green energy and green tech. And interestingly, a lot of that comes from China, which is ironically one of the greatest polluters on the face of the planet, maybe the greatest. They pollute more than anybody. And again, when they sign the Paris Climate Accord, it doesn't put restrictions on the Chinese market. They could build coal-fired power plants and everything else en masse and pretend to be a green country and then sell us the solar panels, which again are not dependable. So they cripple our energy industry while building up theirs using dirty energy. Now, on this front though, the United States is now pushing back. Epoch Times said the U.S. government is raising its tariff rates on Chinese solar wafers and phyllosilicon to 50% and certain tungsten products to 25% effective January 1st, 2025. And it says, quote, the tariff increase announced today will further blunt the harmful policies and practices by the People's Republic of China. That's according to Trade Representative Catherine Tai, stated on December 11th. It notes as well that U.S. officials have criticized China for predatory trade practices, pointing to a history of Beijing directing Chinese industries to price competitors out of the market in strategic fields. The CCP, typically what they do, they have state-funded enterprises that do this. They don't need to make a profit, technically. They will bid below costs, put their competitors out of business, and they can bid below cost because, again, the government in China basically pays for it. Yes, there are U.S. subsidies as well, but not to the extent China does it. They subsidize it so they don't make a profit, or they even operate at a massive loss. They put their competitors out of business, then they dominate the market, and once they dominate the market, then they charge whatever they want or use it as trade weapons. Now notice the tariffs now to prevent a lot of this under Section 301, a statute that allows the United States to take actions when foreign countries violate U.S. trade agreements is now in place. And as Section 301 saw renewed use under the Trump administration, which applied a series of trade and tariffs and sanctions in attempts to hold the Chinese regime accountable for breaking trade agreements, which they tend to always do. And as the Biden administration continued and expanded on those actions, maintaining and increasing the tariffs upon renewal. The clean tech tariffs announced on December 11th were implemented by the Biden administration and are up for a 4-year renewal. We'll see if Trump continues using these, but right now, again, they're going after the CCP's energy market. And look, this is important right now because the Chinese Communist Party is facing a lot of issues with overproduction. Basically, they produced too much in certain fields and they can't sell it. To get around that, what they're doing is they're dumping it on the global markets. Other countries, not just the United States, but even Europe and others, they're putting anti-dumping measures in place to make sure the CCP doesn't flood their markets and drive prices down and basically eliminate their industries. It's becoming more apparent right now that green energy is not necessarily reliable. And also it has given the Chinese regime a pseudo-monopoly over key parts of that industry. And look, this is important because with the United States, with Trump coming in, the U.S. is poised to start a revival of normal energy programs. The system that is largely incentivized propping up the green energy market could basically be coming to an end. We may be watching an end to the green energy era and the rise of drill baby drill, as Trump has been calling it, right? Folks, in other news, something big is going on. Derek Chauvin, who was convicted of violating the civil rights of the now deceased George Floyd, may have a new chance to appeal the case. Chauvin's lawyers were given permission right now to have tissue and fluid samples from George Floyd's body tested to determine the actual cause of death. Fox 9 said that a federal judge on Monday approved a motion from Derek Chauvin's legal team to analyze heart tissue and fluid samples from George Floyd's autopsy to see whether Floyd may have died from a heart condition, meaning not from, again, the officer allegedly having his knee on his neck. New footage suggested that his knee was not on his neck, it was actually on his upper back. But take it for what you will. And it's the former Minneapolis police officer is currently serving a prison sentence on a federal conviction for violating George Floyd's civil rights. He filed a motion in 2023 seeking to overturn the conviction, claiming in part there was new evidence showing he did not cause Floyd's death. Now, on this, we'll have to see what actually happens, right? The case was, in fact, deeply politicized. I think that's something everyone can mostly agree on because it was framed along the lines of race, because it was a white police officer and a black man. In fact, if you read even the news reporting from most of the legacy news, they still mention the race of everybody. It was also used for the BLM riots that swept across the country, and people were looting and burning buildings and killing people. A lot of that was based on George Floyd's killing, or death, whatever you want to call it, right? We'll see. Now, there have been discussions on evidence in the case that some say could prove Chauvin's innocence, but so far his conviction has held. So far, none of the attempts to overturn it have worked. This is the latest. Some have speculated that Donald Trump may also pardon Chauvin, the officer, when he takes office. To be clear on this, Trump has not said he would do that, but people suggest that he might because Trump has suggested giving police broader immunity from prosecution. And the case with Chauvin and Floyd, that's kind of one of the more high-profile cases in that regard where a police officer has faced prosecution. Folks, that said, hit the like button, leave a comment, and let's jump into some questions. And again, I apologize for the technical issues today. Thanks for sticking with me, folks. It's the unfortunate reality of being on the road with this show. Those of you who watch Crossroads often know that, again, I travel for reporting, I attend events and so on. And when I do that, we need to do from hotel rooms, and sometimes we just deal with some technical issues. So I do apologize. But thank you for sticking it out with me. All right, folks, I want to know your take. What do you think about Chauvin trying to get the case dismissed? Do you think this is a good idea, a bad idea? What do you think about the U.S. monitoring for solar geoengineering? Ironically, something that was regarded as a big conspiracy theory just a few years ago, and now NOAA and other parts of the U.S. government are like monitoring for it. Do you think it's needed? Do you think they should be doing that? Interestingly, this could even end maybe the debate on, people call these airplanes spraying stuff in the air. It could monitor for stuff like that too. So interesting time to be in, right? All right, folks, let's see. First question here. Ashley from California, you're saying, would that mean a new fate for the convicted officers? So in terms of Derek Chauvin trying to, again, get the case overturned, it could definitely change the fate of it, because let's put it this way. I watched a lot of the early autopsy reports with the whole case around George Floyd and stuff, because journalists initially were given access to it. If you read the initial autopsy reports, they were significantly different from the later ones. The initial reports did say that there was evidence of fatal levels of fentanyl in George Floyd's body. Later analysis claimed that wasn't the case. And so it created a kind of a discrepancy on the facts, and people didn't know which to believe. I'm aware from talking to police officers that initial footage that was released actually showed that Derek Chauvin had his knee not on George Floyd's neck, but on his upper back. And there were, in fact, recordings of different camera angles that showed this. Those videos have now been released, and you can see it for yourself. Derek Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's back, not on his neck. The other side is that normally for police officers, if the individual can speak, it means their esophagus is not blocked. And if their esophagus is not blocked, it means, yes, they can breathe. And if they asphyxiate from something other than their esophagus being blocked, it probably means something else caused the death. And so if George Floyd was saying, "I can't breathe," that says that his esophagus was not blocked under normal analysis. And so officers would take that into account. The other side is in the actual police department where this took place, and I know this because I know police officers, in the actual use of force doctrine, in other words, written code the police officers have to follow, in their use of force doctrine, kneeling on the jugular or blocking the jugular until the person loses consciousness is actually within the use of force of that particular police department. Different police departments have different issues with the use of force. In other words, you can render a suspect unconscious if they're resisting arrest, if you can't arrest them by normal means. And the reason it went to that stage was because George Floyd was resisting arrest. They couldn't put him in the police car. He was acting erratic. And when they were trying to put him in, he was putting his legs up and so on. They couldn't do it. And so based on use of force, that was the excuse they used. Based on the court cases said that Derek Chauvin violated George Floyd's civil rights. And they did accuse Chauvin of being responsible for the death of George Floyd as an extension of his violation of civil rights. And again, that's basically where things were with it. You believe what you want with it. I think the important issue with this is that there is a reanalysis of the facts. And the case is being reopened to an extent to actually look at what actually killed George Floyd. Whether it was Derek Chauvin putting his knee on his neck or back, whichever you choose to believe, or whether it was fatal drugs in his system, or whether it was a pre-existing heart condition Floyd had, which they do say was the case. And the case right now they're looking at is not about drugs. They're saying they're saying that George Floyd had a heart condition and a heightened level of adrenaline flowing into his heart from the shock of the incident and his panic, that it would have caused a heart defect that could have caused the death. Again, that is something that they're looking into right now. We cannot say that is the fact of the case, but that is something that they are investigating, and that's the nature of the current reevaluation of the evidence. We'll see what happens. It is possible the case could get overturned, and if that happens, There's a possibility we could see a lot of riots return as well, or maybe not, because BLM was behind a lot of the riots. BLM, the same groups that are operating BLM, a lot of it's like communist and socialist groups. They've been more focused on Palestine and stuff like that lately. And a lot of those groups too, they've gotten themselves into hot water because they were taking money and buying real estate and basically embezzling money and stuff. And so many of the key people have kind of gotten off the movement because of that. We'll see what happens. Emotion 007, you're saying, Josh, look what happened in UK or Canada right now with their DEI and woke policies. It's pretty much a communist country. Yeah, I'm aware. Actually, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're even being done in countries in Latin America. I have friends in a lot of parts of the world. We have audience in many parts of the world for Crossroads. I know that in Brazil, I've talked to individuals and journalists down there, and they say that even in Brazil, which, normally if you look at these DEI narratives, people say Latin American, Latino, Latinx, and that's regarded as a kind of racial group. In America, the Latino identity is taken as a racial protected group. You're not black Latino, you're not white Latino, you're not native Latino, you're just Latino. They basically take the entire region and compress it into a single identity in the United States. In Latin America, they don't do that though. In Latin America, I know a lot of, again, like a lot of my cousins are half Mexican, right? My dad, used to, he's going to reopen it, runs a burrito restaurant, you know what I mean? We own a Mexican restaurant. But in Latin America, a lot of people were kind of racially blind. They don't pay attention to this stuff. They don't see a white Brazilian or a black Brazilian or a white Mexican or a black Mexican or a native or whatever. Some of them do, some of them don't. There are communist and socialist groups throughout Latin America that have tried manufacturing that as well. And so even though in America, with DEI initiatives, the Latino identity has been consolidated, these same movements are doing the opposite throughout Latin America. And they're actually demonizing white people in Brazil, and they're promoting different racial, backgrounds in Brazil, just like they're doing in the United States. They're tearing down statues of the founding fathers of these countries. They're trying to destroy the histories of these countries. They're using the exact same narratives. They're doing the same thing in Africa, where you have these groups saying, kill the Boer, and they're saying that they need to go kill the white farmers. Racial agitation propaganda is not just a US or Western Europe thing. It's something that groups, mostly communist groups, are doing in basically every single country on earth where you have different racial groups or different tribal groups having any kind of relations. Again, because communism works off class struggle. It works basically off struggle and atheism. Those are the two core tenets that communism pulls from. They want to destroy religion, and they want to turn people against each other, fundamentally. But on your point, actually, you can look to Canada and the UK where these programs have been taken pretty far, where you can have an immigrant commit rape or commit really terrible crimes, and the immigrant will face a lower charge than somebody who goes on the internet and criticizes it based on the grounds of race. Engaging in racial discrimination in the UK will get you a stronger criminal sentence in courts, oftentimes, than even child sexual abuse. You will face greater punishment for that than what we would normally regard as really serious crimes. And, part of the reason is because, Canada, the UK, they don't have the same constitution America does. Many countries don't. Australia doesn't, right? We saw a lot of this, of course, during COVID. Most of Europe doesn't. Most of the world doesn't. America and the ideas of our Bill of Rights are usually taken as a demand of the citizenry, right? People tend to view the American values as things that maybe protect their rights, but they don't necessarily have these rights. And in countries like the UK, where the system of law is not necessarily written as a hard law, they go by what's called spirit of the law, where the law can be, it's kind of up to the person interpreting it. They can change the law case by case because of that. There are different arguments on that. They call it spirit of the law or word of the law. Word of the law meaning a very strict interpretation of a very rigid legal system. Spirit of the law meaning you're judging based on the merits of the individual case and you're taking a lot of other things into consideration. Personally, I would say spirit of the law works when you have hard protected rights within a constitution. Otherwise, it's just in the spur of the moment. And I think that's a problem you're seeing with some of these other countries. But it is true, these countries have taken it a lot further than the United States has, and we are seeing the kind of problems coming about from that. Judith Yakim, you're saying, newsflash, I actually deliver DEI trainings at work. Do you really? Tell us more, Judith. You're saying, Judith's saying that she delivers DEI trainings at work. She says, I make sure that I give extra attention to working through diversity of opinion, belief, and personality, culture, among other stuff. I make it do what it says it does. Good on you, Judith. You're saying 4D chess. Maybe that's the solution, folks. Judith's saying, the reason I chose to take these trainings is because people get lost in translation a lot, and the actual bridging of gaps would be necessary. It's just activism took the ideas over and made it their own. Yeah, I mean, that's the issue. I think part of the issue is, I think it's a good thing if people can learn to not be mean to each other. I think it's a good thing if people can learn to become more tolerant. And when I say tolerant, I mean actual tolerance, not the kind of like political tolerance we have now. Tolerance where a person can annoy you, you can disagree with somebody, and you tolerate them, right? That kind of tolerance. The kind of tolerance where this person has radically different political views than you, but you can still be friends, right? I would call that tolerance. Tolerance where a person has made life choices that you disagree with or maybe even feel are immoral, but you still love them as a friend or family member. That, to me, that's what tolerance is. Or tolerance in that somebody even offends you and you don't take it that seriously. You know, look, I'm a kid of the 90s, right? And I remember back when we used to insult each other all the time in the 90s among friends groups, and we didn't get offended by it. We used to joke with each other about these things. Go and watch some of the comedians in the 90s. They said things that would get people thrown in prison these days in some countries, and we all thought it was funny. How far have we come? Because, again, we don't really practice true tolerance these days. We practice intolerance under the guise of tolerance. I think Judith has an interesting take with this, which is, you know, as you're saying, 4D chess, subvert the subverters, and basically, you know, take control of their ship and steer it in a different direction. Judith, that's an interesting take. Yeah, good on you. All right, another question here. JNS2, 1970. You're saying communism didn't end when the Berlin Wall came down. They moved it to environmentalism. Yeah, part of it. You know, they used to call it watermelons, right? The phrase that was used against the eco-communists was watermelons. Do you know why they call them watermelons? Pop quiz, folks. Why did they call them watermelons? Because it's green on the outside and it's red on the inside. Green on the outside, red on the inside. And part of the argument is you can social engineer a society, not saying we need to create class equality, but instead we need to fix the climate apocalypse, right? And so they basically use a different narrative to achieve the same ends, which is mass consolidation under a centralized structure that is an ever-expanding system that infringes upon the rights of individuals, businesses, and the entire corporate structure. That basically because what do communists aim to do? They aim to consolidate power to themselves, so they want to have the power to basically regulate and control everything. They want to control the businesses, they want to control the religions, they want to control the newspapers, They want to control what's being taught in schools, the education systems. They want to control the individual thoughts and beliefs of the individual. How do they achieve that? Well, they convince people that there is a massive problem and threat facing society and that only they are the ones capable of solving it. So the communists under Stalin or Pol Pot or Mao Zedong, they would say it's the landlords, it's the educated class. Hitler said it was the Jewish people, right? Stalin would say it's the kulaks, it's the wealthy peasants. And the only way we can prevent this threat and this harming of you is if you give me unlimited power, right? You make me the ultimate dictator, then I can save you from it. That's the narrative, right? And so what they do is they start creating new education systems to teach the populace about the dangers to society, granting authority to the centralized state. They create new regulations to the businesses to prevent them from exploiting people through the lens of this danger. They control the religions because the religions might be teaching people values that are allowing for this exploitation to take place. And so you have to control them. You have to control the land. You have to centralize control and management of the resources, right? The grain or the seeds or the farmland to these central authorities because Stalin needs to protect you from the exploiting, wealthy peasants who are going to take over everything. That was the narrative. They're doing the same thing under environmentalism. Rather than saying it's a class or a group, they're saying, well, maybe they are. They're saying it's the, exploiting class. And they're buying up resources and they're abusing the land and so on. And so you have to control speech. Of course, how many, I wouldn't call them, maybe not religious institutions. I don't think they really go after religion, but they do say that some of them, because of their views, they actually do attack religions quite a bit. They do attack, for example, the education system, where they have systems in place to give them power to tell your kids what to think. They even expand now the environmental policies into DEI policies, where they've expanded the narrative to say that racial discrimination is a result of climate change, that crime is a result of climate change, that gun violence is a result of climate change. And so now to prevent climate change, we have to stop racism, we have to stop gun violence, we have to stop congestion in the streets. They keep expanding it to give themselves increasing power and increased centralization. And so, yes, to JNS 2 1970's point, absolutely. Although I would say not all environmentalists are like this, there is a very centralized class that has used it this way. Absolutely so, without a doubt. And again, that's why they used to call them watermelons, right? Green on the outside, red on the inside. And look, to that point, like I grew up with a pretty, green background, living off grid. My dad knew how to fix solar generators and so on. Very into like natural living and natural foods and kind of like hippie-ish, but conservative still. And so, I would actually draw a difference between that and the communist environmentalism. You'll find a lot of hunters, a lot of people who are outdoorsmen, hunters, survivalists. A lot of them, ironically, are better stewards of the land than most of these environmentalists. A lot of them are more in favor of conservation because they actually love the land and they love nature and they love getting out in it and they're kind of integrated with it. Ironically, those people tend to be better at conserving the land. And the other argument against the centralized argument on what is best for the environment is that private property and private ownership and the prevention of monopoly creates better stewardship of the land because you tend to not want to destroy the land that you own. And, who is a better steward of the land, right? Again, I used to hunt. I used to fish all the time. I used to live on property which was self-sustaining because we planted enough fruit trees where we could basically just live off the land and go fishing and hunting for our meat. I personally lived like that. And, By no means am I in favor of this mass centralized, all authoritarian environmental system. But I do love the land personally, right? Mark Harmon, you're saying China costs money to create energy. Yeah. So, this is one of the other arguments with energy, is that energy actually can create centralized powers. I'll give you a real example of this. Do you remember during Donald Trump's first term in office, where he was speaking to the different governments in Europe, and he was telling these governments in Europe, right, the Germans and the British and everybody else, he told them, he said, if all of you keep pushing for green energy, it's not, not his exact words, but essentially what he said was, it's not sustainable. If you want to make wind turbines and offshore solar farm or wind farms and solar farms, it'll provide you energy, but you're going to have brownouts and you're going to have other problems. And what's going to happen is you're going to have to import energy from other countries. And he said, if you do this, you are going to become dependent on Russia. Russia is going to control your countries through energy dominance. That's what Trump warned them of. And what happened? Well, they all laughed at Trump. Ha, 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 you don't understand. What a fool. The Green Revolution will not be stopped because of this. What happened after that? Well, the Russia-Ukraine war took place after Trump left office. And Germany and many other countries that have become very dependent on green energy found that if you have a hailstorm one day and it destroys all your solar panels, suddenly you don't have energy. If the wind stops blowing for a little bit, you don't have wind energy. If you don't create batteries to store enough of the excess energy, and here's the thing, green energy creates a lot of energy in bursts. You get a lot of it when things are running well. When the sunlight is there, when the wind is blowing real strong, you get a lot of energy. But you have to send it to other countries. They generate so much during certain periods that they can't even send it to other countries, so they have to pay countries to take it sometimes. They end up having problems with it. It turns out, no, it's not reliable. You need to basically support, if you really want that, you need to support it with other, call it whatever you want, sources of energy, coal or nuclear or something else. And I know people criticize those these days, but if done in a modern country, right? If America builds a coal-fired power plant, the only product it releases is like water, right? There's almost no pollution. If China builds coal power plants, it massively pollutes because they don't build the clean ones, they build dirty ones. Nuclear has become very clean. The concern with nuclear, though, is if there's a war and a nuclear plant gets bombed, then you do have some real problems on hand. But what ended up happening for Europe is because they found that green energy needs to be supplemented. You can't only rely on it. They found that, yes, just as Trump warned them and just as they laughed at Trump for saying it, they became dependent on Russia for natural gas and for nuclear energy and for other things like that. And so, in other words, their green agendas crippled them, and then they had to ironically buy the very same energy that they were criticizing, natural gas, nuclear, gas, oil, whatever else, from Russia, right? And same thing in America. We actually import a lot of our energy from Canada and Mexico. And, and some people would argue that that's the real purpose of these international agreements, that they don't actually prevent what they claim is dirty energy, right? They only prevent the countries capable of having clean energy production in what people would consider dirty energy, and instead allow basically just an open slate for countries that are very heavily polluting to do as much as they want. So you have India mass producing very dirty energy, right? They don't do it in a clean way. You have China mass producing very dirty energy. They don't do it in a clean way. You have other countries mass producing it because they don't have the modern facilities that do it very clean. And the countries that have the modern facilities that do it very clean, the United States and Western Europe mostly, we're basically out of the business. in my opinion, in my personal opinion. And look, I am all for clean energy. I would love to have clean energy. I have personally lived on property where we had solar panels. I think they're great. They can't cover everything, but they work if you use them a little bit. I think it's fantastic, but I personally think, and this is just my opinion, the most effective way for clean energy would be if America, which can make coal-fired power plants operating very clean, which can make natural gas, energy very clean, if instead of trying to export what is not a renewable resource, even though they call solar panels and wind turbines clean, the process of mining for the minerals you need it is insanely poisonous to the land. In China, when they do this stuff, it destroys the environment. You need to clear cut massive amounts of land. You need to strip mine. You need to, you think like environmental destruction. Think like World War I level decimation of the land for this. And then it releases poisonous toxins into the water. So it poisons the water supply. I would say that's worse than having a dang, coal plant releasing some smoke in the air. Personally, that's way worse, especially the scale they need it to support the global energy infrastructure. You need some of that for modern technology, but the scale they're doing it at to support green energy is horrific. I would say that the most effective way would be to allow the United States to go and build clean coal plants throughout Africa or India or Latin America and actually build sustainable clean energy supplies in those countries and allow them to have smaller scale mining operations that are not going to decimate the land and poison their water supplies. If you were to ask me, that would be a better solution. Now, agree with me, disagree with me, let me know, but that's my opinion, right? And again, the problem is this stuff has basically given China, the Chinese Communist Party, a monopoly over the global energy supply. It's horrible what it's done. Anyways, folks, now before we head out for today, I'm actually in Arizona at Turning Point, USA. So we're again recording from my hotel room. Before we head out, I did publish a special feature actually earlier this week on Tuesday. And we exposed a new program of the Chinese Communist Party. What the CCP is doing right now is they're trying to export their human rights abuses to the United States. And the CCP, basically, they're feeding false information to puppet journalists and puppet YouTubers. Some people have even come up publicly and alleged the CCP has attempted to pay them money to publish the CCP's propaganda, raising some questions over some of the organizations we've seen doing this on whether they've taken money from China. The CCP, and again, we have information now from insiders in China claiming that Xi Jinping himself ordered this back in 2022. The CCP is basically feeding false information to American news outlets, YouTubers, and they're trying to, again, have their puppets within different organizations trigger criminal investigations based off that to manufacture controversy in America to tear down and attack dissident groups on American soil. I have done a special feature exposing the information we have gotten from insiders in China, including leaked documents, including insiders who were present at some of these classified video calls. I have detailed exactly what they're doing. I also detail the organizations of the CCP involved and also some of the military programs that are involved with this. This is a very important special feature because it has to do with the basic sovereignty of the United States. And it shows kind of an enhanced level of what they used to call these secret Chinese police stations. The CCP is basically activating its spies in America to carry out this operation. And the US government has actually arrested some Chinese agents which may be tied to this, and there's some pretty important stuff going on. This issue needs to get out, folks. And so, again, I've published a special feature, and honestly, Epoch Times seems to be we are one of the named targets of the CCP in this operation, so they're coming after us. I have that special feature published now. You can watch it on Epoch TV, you can watch it on YouTube, you can watch it on Ganjing World. We have the link to this in the description. Don't miss it. This is a very important special feature. Don't miss it. And also, please help us get the word out on this. Please tell a friend or family member about it. Send it everywhere you can, folks. And that said, I will see you all tomorrow. Sorry about the technical problems today. But I will see you all tomorrow. We got things worked out, folks. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you. Leaked communications within China have revealed plans at the highest levels of the Chinese Communist Party to export its human rights abuses outside the country. And this involves a whole-of-government strategy running from within the CCP, which in turn uses its networks of influence in the United States to carry out these operations.
You get influential people in another country, in your target area, to do what you want, and to create these narratives that suit the Chinese communists.
If you can persuade the media persuades the public drives the political action.
This is a blueprint. This is a blueprint for how the CCP can weaponize our media, our government, our legal system to go after any company or any group they want to.
It's really gone global. Political warfare has, in a way that, quite frankly, we've never seen.